This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation. Well, welcome everyone. Again, thank you panelists for joining us. This is our second conversation around well-being. So again, it was such a resounding message that we heard when we surveyed for panel topics that there's enough to talk about to do this conversation around wellness at an individual level all the way up to a societal level more than once and with additional perspectives. So welcome to our panelists. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves in just a moment, but we are going to jump right in. And what I'll say is that in our previous panel conversation that we had around well-being, we talked about the need for a global wellness check. And we shared some staggering statistics about the increase in difficulty for people to even find care right now, let alone to have the awareness that individuals even know they need to pay attention to something like this. So I'm looking, I think, for this conversation to dig a little bit more into what's going on in the workplaces as it relates to employee wellness. And we'll see where it goes from there. So, Paul, thank you for joining us again on A Leadership Beyond. Would you kick us off with just a brief introduction about yourself, your background, and share a little bit about how you have come to this passion of well-being?
No, thanks, Adrian. I appreciate it. Appreciate you choosing me to go first, put me on the spot a little, but
You
so
like that HR hot seat, right?
well, it's helped sharpen my ability to think on my feet, that's for sure. But my name's Paul LaLonde. I am the Vice President of People and Culture at CEDA. We are the Community Economic Development Association of Cook County. It is the community action agency in Chicagoland, so Cook County, Chicago. That's a fancy way of saying we do a lot of social service programming for low-income individuals. So the thing I really like about working at CEDA is the legacy of the war on poverty and the civil rights movement that started in the 60s. So that is a little bit about my background and my organization.
Well, thank you. Welcome. And Dr. Natacha, thank you for joining us. You're the next spot in my lineup here.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. So my name is Dr. Natacha Nelson, and I'm a chiropractor by trade, and I had a brick and mortar practice for about 15 years. And one of the things that was always so important to me is I took the word doctor really literally, where in Latin it means to teach. And it was such a foundation of my practice where I really wanted to teach people not just about their body and how it works, but really the meaning of health and wellness. Because this whole idea, everyone's like, I want to be healthy. I want to be healthy. I said, well, that's great, but how do you define it first? How do you know if you have it? And so that is really how I really dug into mm, all of about health and wellness and well-being, that now when I do, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's workshops, I always start with, well, what is health? And what I teach on is the 5 pillars of health now, which is the physical, chemical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Because what I found is just by breaking down in the 5 pillars, it's really about the education and teaching that there are different facets of health and being able to break those down so that individual people can have a better understanding of what health is, but where there may be something out of balance and how to like a little bit more systematically approach it, that it doesn't seem so scary. And everything that I talk about always comes back to how the body works, how the body's made, how it relates with nature, and the fundamentals of, well, if you understand how the body works naturally on its own, then you can start with that to go with, well, where is it out of alignment? Where's the misalignment? What's happening? And where's the breakdown? So that's a little bit about me and what I do and my approach to health and wellness.
Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Amanda, please share a little bit about your background.
Sure, thank you. My name is Amanda Ryznar. I am VP of Wellness Programs and Marketing for a company called Our Family Health. And we are a primary medical care practice that started in 2008. And then we just opened a wellness center in 2023. Prior to that, I spent 20 years in financial services, so quite a big jump from financial services to healthcare. When I was in financial services, I started to get really passionate about health and wellness in my early 20s, largely due to the fact that I saw my parents start to have some significant challenges with chronic health conditions. And I also started to see other family members struggling with their health. And as a person in corporate America, I also started to see people navigating a lot of pressure and stress connected to their jobs. And I was connecting the dots, kind of watching my parents' journey and the people that I loved journeys, and then watching people on my team and my colleagues, what they were navigating. And so on the side, I started pursuing different certifications. So I became a health coach, later a board certified health coach, but initially just a health coach. And then I pursued a certification to become a mindfulness teacher. And so when I left corporate America in 2019, did not realize the pandemic was on its way. I was lucky to be speaking with a former coworker that I worked with in financial services who knew that I was really passionate about wellness and asked me if I would be interested in helping to start a wellness center. And so I was so grateful for that opportunity and really see this now as a way to um, connect all the dots in terms of my own passion and purpose in life and help to effectuate change within the healthcare space. As Dr. Natacha was saying, 5 pillars of health is very much what we are focused on as well. Traditional primary care medicine does not really allow for a lot of time to support people in lifestyle modifications. And it doesn't really allow for a lot of time and practical support in those applications. And so we have developed this center that has a focus on physical movement, on receiving support through stress management, nutrition coaching, and then also providing a lot of different modalities in the wellness arena, things like cryotherapy and infrared sauna and IV therapy that can help people who are navigating chronic health conditions. The center is outside of Atlanta. I'm very lucky that I actually work remote. I live in Chicago. And so it's been an interesting endeavor navigating this from a remote perspective. But I am fortunate to be here today. And I really care a lot about employee well-being and helping people live their best lives in the way that works for them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What a journey for sure.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to say you've come across from the dark side, but maybe that's not fair to our financial services professionals.
I say it's not fair at all because if it weren't for the dark side, I wouldn't even know Amanda. The chances that I would happen to Atlanta to so you,
Yeah.
and just a little play, and we know Paul is big philosopher, but really when you think about it, regardless of your religious, theological, or philosophical bent, we are called to be light bearers, and there is a shadow side to corporate life, but that's also where people gather many hours. And even when Amanda tells the story about the wellness center, it was a colleague. So I think that another thing comes to mind, and then we'll ask questions because I don't want to be me talking. But Dr. Natacha said something that hit me hard, which is I have tended towards being overweight, and I've read all the stuff about obesity, and I know that it's not healthy, and I want to be here for my grandchildren. And Amanda talked about seeing family members, but I remember the day I took action was I was in the classroom, and around 3 o'clock. I lost energy. I got the 3 o'clock slump. And I said, the participants are supposed to get that. I'm not supposed to get it. I'm in the energy business. I love this. And I very easily, steadily released about 55 pounds. And then the joke is the COVID-19 pounds, but for me, it was more the COVID 50. But I realized the connection because I knew I needed to do something about it and didn't get started. The connection was that virtual living allows me more opportunities to snack, more opportunities to sit, but I'm still in the energy business. So the only reason I say all of that to our listeners is there is both a global and a personal level to wellness, and statistics, true though they may be, hit everybody differently. So if we find out what matters most to us, it increases our motivation, and then we can get help from and support from Natacha and Amanda and Paul. But if we're not connected to what's important to us, that's all just information.
Gets us right back to our purpose, to our why, right? Which, or the North Star, however you like to refer to it, but it's that anchoring, if you will, that allows us to. I like the sailing metaphors, as many people know, right? But it's the anchoring that allows you to set sail, right? Is the way that I like to refer to it. So, Amanda, you already touched on what you had began to see in the workplace in terms of your observations with coworkers. Paul and Natacha, have you seen the same in terms of, like, what trends have you seen in the last, I mean, I would say we could say post-COVID, but even in the last 5 years, I think we were trending towards this issue of wellness, right? And an employee just fatigue, I guess, for lack of a better word. So anything to add from your observations?
Yes. I had seen the trend, 20 years.
Yeah.
And I feel it's amazing because when I started as a chiropractor and I talked about the life force and the energy in the body, people were kind of like,
Woo-woo.
yeah, whatever. You're just a, chiropractor. And over the last pre-COVID, but really maybe 7-8 years, and the recognition of the energy that we carry and people wanting more and people caring enough to start to go, hey, how do I have more energy? How do I get more energy? How do I feel more energized and have more of it? And people are really curious and interested. And this is where it's fun because people now want to know more of the details and wanting to know more detail about where they're leaking energy or how to get energy. And while there's a lot of misinformation, people are so open to learning more and wanting to know details. And this is where I feel like there's it's revived in my profession and others, where being able to explain how the body works, explain energy, explain where we get it, whether it's our food, but really explaining to people where it leaks and how the workplace for many, sucks the energy out from the people to the lighting, to the cubicle setting, to the management and leadership styles and communication. People, I think, are become so much aware that, even having people that you go to work with where it's okay, like not just the disagreement, but people whose energy vampires that suck the life out of you, that's become recognize where people go, oh my gosh, like they'll suck the energy out. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen so much more now is even in whether it's corporate, it's people are so much more aware of the details of energy, how to have more, where it's leaking, and they're more interested in learning. And I love that because their interest in learning makes them ask better questions, which makes me be a better doctor in explaining. And so that's one of the big shifts I've loved this last 7-8 years.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off of what Dr. Nelson was saying from the workplace, I've seen some of those shifts leading into COVID, right? You kind of saw a little bit COVID, then just kind of busted the door wide open for a lot of different reasons in a lot of different workplace trends. But from the wellness perspective, especially over the last couple of years, I think a lot of people are emphasizing it more, employers are emphasizing it more. I think where a lot of workplaces fall short is they put it on the employee rather than on the organization. Um, and I want to be clear, it takes both. But a lot of employers say, okay, well, here's a great EAP, go see the EAP, but then you come back to the exact same toxic workplace that put you in that position to begin with. It's like you're not going to cure the disease by continuing to go back to what's getting you sick in the first place. So I would
Yeah.
challenge a lot of workplaces and organizations to think holistically, and everybody has a personal responsibility for their own health, but organizations have a responsibility to their employees to create an environment to where they're not getting sick in the first place.
Amen. You can lead a horse to water, right? But we need to provide the water
And space to drink the water.
and space to drink the water. So to piggyback on, I have a statistic that relates to this that I just read in an article this morning, actually, that SHRM did a 2022 Mental Health in America report. You all may have seen this as well. 4 out of 5 employers have committed to expanding wellness in the workplace. That's in 2022. And then a later study last year suggested, to your point, Paul, that the resources that are being created or provided by the employer through those programs are not meeting the needs of the employees or are too superficial, like an EAP, right? For example, great program. Is it too superficial to genuinely be effective, to really get to the root of the toxic environment that is sucking the energy, to use Natacha's example, right? So I guess my next question is maybe we put on our design hats for a moment and think, okay, if we were in charge of designing a wellness program, what would it look like? What would be the critical components to include?
I would start with from a wellness perspective, it can't be just this isolated program, right? That's housed in human resources or whatever it ends up being. It has to really permeate the entire culture. HR can be the driver, and in some ways is probably best suited to be the driver in some instances, depending on the complexity of the organization, whatever. But it really has to be embedded into the infrastructure of the entire organization. Otherwise, it's going to fail. Um, so having an EAP is great, and I'm a huge believer in EAP. I think it's the minimum, quite honestly, that organizations need to be doing. But you know, other things are, what other policies are you doing to support your individuals? How are you training your frontline managers? The most important relationship in all of organizations is the manager supervisor relationship. If you have a whole bunch of managers that are world beaters and just results, 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 results. Okay, the bottom line looks great, but you're burning out everybody, and you don't have any of those other cost saving measures that are on the back end, so to speak. So eh, your AP is not going to help with that at all. So how are you designing the organization from a wellness perspective? That's I think the first question organizations should ask themselves.
Let's stick with that and go around the horn. Amanda?
I think that 100% it has to permeate throughout the organization. I think the organization's core values are critical, that they have to be established in a way that makes it clear that wellness is what wellness is defined as within the organization and how it's going to be represented in the organization in terms of how you're expected to be able to care for yourself and work. What does that actually look like? And the senior leadership team and all of the frontline managers are embodying that, right? They're setting the tone for what that looks like. I think a lot of navigating wellness is allowing people to understand what their core beliefs are for themselves, about themselves, and how does that manifest in their health? What does that look like? There's a lot of people who are operating in corporate America who are working really long hours because it's a belief that they need to, that's what equates to the best output and the best performance, and they don't have support setting boundaries. So I think there's a lot of mindfulness that needs to come into establishing a program. That's really the root of it, though, is what do you actually believe and what do you see? The 5 pillars of health are a logical way to organize wellness programs. I think sometimes what gets lost in translation is that people get really overwhelmed by the breadth of what you could actually do. And what people seem to respond to the most inside of a corporate setting and outside of a corporate setting are simple, consistent things that they can do. And so I think that coaching is a huge way to help people. I personally, and I'm biased, but I think that organizations would benefit from having access to health coaches who are supporting their employee populations. I think the health coach can help work with the leadership team to implement wellness initiatives and based on what's actually going on with the employee population. From a financial standpoint, I'm not ignorant to the cost of doing all of this. However, I also know that someone with type 2 diabetes is expected to spend almost $10,000 a year on medical expenses connected to that. And there's a pretty long trajectory for type 2 diabetes. And so if you are helping people avoid and reverse chronic conditions, I haven't done the analysis completely myself, but I would be willing to bet that it would net out that you'd still be ahead financially if you invested in the right way and used data to make the decisions.
Natasha,
Yeah.
put your design hat on for the wellness program.
Yeah. I think, as Amanda was saying, because I know when I've spoken about the 5 pillars, each person gravitates to 1 or 2 of those pillars. And each one pick, 1 or 2 that is appropriate for them. I think one of the places that I've seen where companies kind of drop the ball is starting with the back end of, well, what is it that the employee needs and wants? And not to try to, it's important that the company has the policy and things in place. But when the employees have a chance to say, what is it that they need? What is it that they want? And I always come back to, well, how do you define the health and the well-being? Because oftentimes that's so much of where the disconnect is. And getting the group to, even if they had, 15 ideas, 20 ideas, let all of them be heard. Because what I found is that in those ideas, there's usually a pattern where 3, 4, 5 topics can be addressed. And even if the employees as a group doesn't get everything they want, they can start to see where, okay, well, these particular programs may cover 70% of what we wanted. Okay. And then for the employer, the company, to break down and offer benefits, whether it's workshops, coaching, and things that are in the groups themselves as the umbrella to what the employee needs and wants. And then you're able to combine that and say, this is what you asked for. This is what I know you needed. This is what we're able to provide and meet for you. One, it helps with the desire for the employee to actually take part and show up and want to do the whatever program is being offered, because it's interesting to them and it's what they asked for and they want. And then it also helps by starting with the back end. Well, how do we know what we're trying to achieve? What is it, the health that we want, the health of the individual, and then tie that in with, well, what's the health of the company? And when you put those two together and you see where they overlap, then you create a program based on where they overlap. And you start there, because now it's a win-win. Everybody's happy on some level, even if it's not perfect, even if it doesn't provide everything for everyone. People can see, like, okay, we made the effort to find that middle, to find what works for both, and then strategize with that, knowing it might take 6 months, a year, 18 months, and allow it to be a work in progress. Allow it to say, we'll start with these. I say, of course, 5 pillars, could be 6 months, 12 months, and allow things to have input and shift slightly as you go, so that it's a work in progress where both people, both the employee, employer, can come and say, this is working, this isn't working, this is really great, not so much, and allow it to be a living, breathing entity of health that expands over the course of the months and years.
This really is, this is classic change management, right? Everything that we described begins with, oh my God, guess what? Ask your employees. I mean, I have been preaching this for decades, right? Like, could we just ask them? Return to work. What should we do? How about you ask your people? Wellness. What's getting in the way? How about you ask your people? We don't want to ask our people because that's hard, right? Because how do we respond to what they say then? But it really begins with ask your people and classic change management. And it's all about stakeholders, right? We lead by example, bring in your C-suite, bring in your champions, because having the program but not living the program doesn't do any good, right? Again, it's returning to that toxic environment. We're going to go have this exercise program, or we'll have this education on mental health, and then go get back to work and hit those numbers. No, right? It's this holistic, well-rounded piece. What are your thoughts? When I think about wellness, I think we're inclined to think about it as psychological, physical, emotional, maybe relational. But I think there's also a component to this that wellness can be broadened to think about it from a career perspective and from a financial perspective as well. And if we pull that into a wellness program, and what I mean by that is there's education on personal finances that we know that can cause stress, right? So follow the line. Are we getting in front of that from a financial perspective? Amanda, you might have a perspective on that. And from a career perspective, where am I going? What's the next step? How am I being developed? That can also create some stress, right? So if we're helping employees to learn more about those capabilities and understand what the possibilities are for them, does that contribute to what we think about, what we jump to when we think about wellness? What would you say?
Yeah, what I keep hearing there is the word uncertainty, and I think all human beings were just wired to not want to think about the future too much, right? Just because we don't know what is around the corner and all those sorts of things. So, um, if we, uncertainty about, are we going to lose our job? Uncertainty about this, that, and the other thing, whatever it ends up being, just causes that the stress hormones and all that stuff to kind of go up. But, you know, I think from that standpoint, what can organizations or employers kind of do to mitigate some of that uncertainty? I mean, you can't take it all out, right? Just being alive is a risk. I mean, just inherent. I mean, it's the truth. You can't take risk out of everything, nor probably should you, even if you could. But what can we do to mitigate that risk of uncertainty for our employees? I mean, we talk about costs, and certainly there's costs. I'm not naive and think that these programs are free, but you got to look at what's the ROI on a lot of those things, and there is ROI on a lot of it. So, one particular program we just implemented that helps with the uncertainty of our employees is we partnered with an organization that does mental health uh, client visits. So, you know, I think we were talking in the pregame, if we call it the pregame, whatever you wanted to call it, but finding a mental health counselor is impossible.
Mhm.
Takes 6 months. And I always liken it to if you break your leg and you wait 6 months, I mean, you're not going to do that because your leg will be pretty much screwed up forever. Think of it in the same way. If you're having mental health challenges, think of it in the exact same way as physical health challenges. So the the vendor that we work with allows unlimited free mental health counseling within 24 hours, 48 hours. So you can just call them and you can set it up, and it's like you can find your doctor just like anything else, and our organization pays for that. It's incredibly minimal, really, at the grand scheme of what we cost. So the employee doesn't need to worry about missing work or the money that it costs to go out and do those things. So we're giving them a little bit of certainty. Is it fixing everything? No, but it's something. I think paid leave policies as well. I mean, we offer paid parental leave, 6 weeks, which is I think pretty generous in America where there's none, quite honestly. So new parents don't have to worry about spending time with their child. Is it on Europe's level? No, but it's ahead of America's level right now. So I
Progress.
think those are just sort of the things progress.
Mhm.
Yeah. When you talk about uncertainty, Paul, I think that's such an important component, and it's right along with what I teach on and what I always, from I talk to my daughter about this idea too, about, you know, we can't avoid uncertainty. You talk about mitigating it, but that's how my approach is when people talk about, I want to get rid of stress or I want to get rid of fill in any blank there. And it's the idea of you don't want to try to just get rid of it. You don't want to just like, how can we avoid it and get rid of it and make it go away? My approach from chiropractic to all these years has been you got to turn and face it and even lean into it a little bit. Whatever is going on that's causing the stress, that's causing a discomfort from the individual level to the company, whatever the it is, you have to look at it and you have to be willing to sit in it. And the discomfort of sitting in pain, wherever that pain is actually how you figure out the answer because the body and the feelings all have a meaning. So when you feel hungry, you don't get mad that you're hungry and wish like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be angry. And I mean, we can feel hangry, but like we're not mad at the idea of that hunger showed up. We're not angry that fatigue showed up. It's the idea that no, those are the body's way of letting you know, pay attention. And stress is the same. I don't use the word stress because it doesn't really have a meaning that the brain understands, but it's well, whatever the it is that's causing the discomfort. There is inherent information in that discomfort if you're willing to not fight so hard to make it go away because that's what causes the long-term issues is pretending it's not there and wishing for it to go away. And that's where the combination of personal responsibility and individual, and from the corporate level to see what is the constant, what are the things that are constantly there that you keep wishing it would go away and trying to make them go away, instead of just saying, how about we look at it and see where the disconnect is and find out the actual root cause and get to the issue itself.
Amanda?
I think that something else that would help employees, at least from my own perspective, is that leaders don't often normalize that when you begin to take on more and more responsibility as you move through organizations, that can be very challenging to manage workload, to manage responsibilities, and that it's a learning curve to figure out how to be in relationship with everything that you're trying to navigate. And so there's a lot of perception that leaders need to look like they have it all figured out. And of course, I'm not advocating for them to appear as if they don't have it figured out. But what I am advocating for them is to say, when I started managing a team, here are some of the things that I really had to navigate, and here's what was challenging for me. Or I have more work than I can do in a day, and it's always going to be that way, and here's how I cope with it. Or here's a new way of how I've started leading my team. I've been running an agile management now, and this is how it's helping my team. I think that there needs to be a lot more willingness to be authentic about what people are navigating when they transition into these different types of roles, instead of creating the impression that everything is great, I can handle this with ease, because then other people are like, well, what's wrong with me that this is so hard? I mean, this is directly my own lived experience of what I struggled with. So maybe I am the only one, but I don't think that's true. And I think that it's exciting to get promoted. It's exciting to get new jobs. It's exciting in many ways, but it does come with stress. And not all of that stress is bad stress. And there could be a lot more authenticity around what to expect and how to navigate these journeys in a more open way. I think a lot of people have these conversations in private with perhaps a mentor, but it's really not part of a broader dialogue. And I don't think that's actually of service to anyone.
Yeah, so somebody appears to be totally in control while all the people she's speaking are feeling totally out of control. There is a disconnect when that happens. Yeah.
I
Well,
think
it
so.
is sad to say the time, not surprising, the time goes really quickly. But we do have time for one more question, and we put pressure on Adrian, and we'll go around the horn on this question.
I asked all the questions this time. Do I get to ask the question to say, Tom, what's your final
You
question?
do. You do. That's fair enough.
Well, I'm going to remember that technique.
That is fair. I will take that. Since we've seen multiple perspectives, which doesn't surprise us, but they align on certain core ideals that just are clearly coming across, and we'll put those on the show notes. So the last question is a word of encouragement to leaders around the area that our guest, Dr. Brian Sykes, told us that burnout, which we've been talking about forever, just recently got an official designation in the World Health Organization. It has its own codes. So we've been using the words, but now it's a medical thing. So the shorten the question, bottom line, it is a word of encouragement about burnout. And I'm looking at Paul because in the nonprofit world, you have mission driven and fewer resources often. So just about encouragement around the fact, and this is a fact, statistically backed, that so many employees are experiencing burnout at the same time they're asked to up their game if they want to keep their job. So an individual perspective on something that touches each of us. And we'll start with Paul.
Yeah, what you talk about, I think I started the started some of my comments talking about how it's the employer's responsibility, and that was actually based uh, on the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, which says is a workplace phenomenon, and that word phrase is specifically used in the WHO's definition of burnout. That's workplace related. So we use the term burnout all the time. Like I'm just burned out at home, or the kids is like. So we're using it at least not medically the same. It's semantics, I guess. But if you focus on the employer and their responsibilities, in that it doesn't absolve again the employee's responsibility. I think if you work for an organization that doesn't care or is not taking burnout, uh, I think seriously, then it's on you, and it's still on you regardless to care for yourself. You know, you have to put the oxygen mask on first, just like they always say, and that's cliche now in the wellness talk world, but it is what it is. But I think find your organization that will support you and let you work the way, that helps you work. Uh, I think one thing to end on is I just listened to a podcast with Simon Sinek, and if you're not familiar with him, go find out him. He's uh, incredibly interesting individual, but he says something that makes me think differently about wellness and these things. He says he doesn't like calling it mental health. He likes calling it mental fitness because he likes to think of it and linking it to the physical side of things, right? You're never done working out. That's fitness. Just like mental health is not a destination. So mental fitness, you're going to have bad days. That's just the part of being a human being, but there should be more days than not if you work on your mental fitness the same as somebody does in the gym.
Right. Amanda?
Echoing back to what Dr. Nelson was saying before in terms of what does the employee want, I think you need to understand what you need to thrive. So what enables you to be successful during your workday? What are the things that are non-negotiable for you? And how can you have a dialogue with your manager to have that be a part of your workday? And if you don't feel comfortable with your manager, then that's a flag that something might need to be evaluated. Because if you know what you need to thrive and the circumstances are not aligning with that, then that's an indication that something needs to change. And you should never assume that what you need to thrive is wrong. It's going to be different for you. And if it's not in place, then that requires additional exploration to get it to be a situation where it is in place.
Bring us home.
All right. So when I think about burnout, and that's my experience, and then talking with clients and companies, I feel that it can feel so big and overwhelming and confusing. And one of the ways that I think is so helpful is paring it down to be able to talk with somebody to say, okay, well, what is the that's causing, like, where's the burnout? Because it's a drain that's been constant. And understanding, is it an expectation that can't be met, that you keep feeling that you somehow are supposed to get there, that you can't? Or is it a conflict between your personal integrity versus what you're supposed to be doing? I feel like just being able to ask somebody what would make a difference for them, it goes back to like asking, but finding out the situation that's causing the burnout, because burnout just seems so big and you can't deal with it. Because by asking, you might find out a lot. Like, is somebody going through, like, I know for me, when I was caring for my mom while she was sick, it's a very specific situation that had, having support during that time, knowing at some point that time is going to end. Okay. Or is it a lifestyle or a belief the expectations or what's supposed to be done that has no end in sight. So being able to identify, well, what's the issue that's causing the burnout on an individual within the company, but you'll find out what's the personal component with it. Once you're breaking those down, it's so much easier to say, okay, well, now we can come up with a solution. We can offer some guidance, whether it's temporary, midterm, long-term, or we need a complete overhaul about what the values and expectations are for the role that you are doing in the company. And once you see it, it's like, oh, immediate, because people want to make a difference and heal and help it and change it. And once it's identified, there's like a sigh of relief of like, now we know what to work on or what to do. It's like how to solve something. So I always come back to, well, how to simplify it, how to define it and make it smaller so it doesn't just seem so big and overwhelming.
Well, thank you so much, each of you and all of you, for joining us, and stay tuned for our continuing conversation on well-being in the workplace.
Thanks for another great conversation, Paul, Natasha, Amanda. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for asking me back. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me. It's a wonderful collection of ideas. I appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you.
Same.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.